Welcome back, everyone. I'm Philippe Khan, and this is usually where you'd see the Daily Driver, but I thought that today we would take a break from the BMW talk because I want to tell you about a special friend of mine by the name of Pedro Beltran. In the strictest sense, Pedro was an employee. He worked for my family as a driver, but in reality, he is so much more. He worked for my family for 44 years, and as such, he is family. When Pedro was 24, he began working for my grandparents. The year was 1961, and I wasn't even a glimmer in someone's eye. One of Pedro's main responsibilities was being my father's chaperone, and as such, he drove my father and mother on their first date, as well as all of their subsequent dates until the day they got married. And on that day, he drove my grandparents so that they could witness their firstborn son get married. In 1967, my grandfather brought home a Mercedes 600, and it was the first. Despite being the first one in the Philippines, there was just one man who was allowed to drive it, and that man was Pedro. He drove my father to work every day, and as you might imagine, those two became very close. My dad actually paid for two of Pedro's kids to go to college. One became an accountant, another an engineer, and I can only imagine how proud he must have been. Pedro himself had a fourth-grade education. Pedro drove me home from the hospital and did the same for my sister. He taught both of my older brothers how to drive and how to drive a manual transmission. He would have done the same for me, except for I had already taught myself how to drive by the time I was 11, sneaking out after lights out and stealing off in the family car. I have a feeling it was Pedro who suggested hiding the keys after he discovered that one of the cars had a funny problem of losing gasoline in the night. In 1984, he moved with us to the States, and he drove me and my sister to school every day. For much of my young life, he was my daily driver. On September 27, 1996, he became a U.S. citizen, a day he would later say was the proudest day of his life. In 2005, he retired and chose to go back home to the Philippines. He owned a coconut plantation in the province of Leyte, and that community opened its arms and welcomed back a favorite son. He was a member of the Knights of Columbus, president of the local homeowners association, and he was what is known as a barangay captain, basically a respected elder in a society which still holds its older generations in high regard. I was lucky enough to see Pedro just a month ago when I was visiting the Philippines, and for once in my life I felt really lucky that my grasp of the Philippine language is so tenuous. Much of the conversation was spent talking about his health, which was not good, but he kept his sense of humor and even managed to laugh and smile while describing exactly what it feels like for a grown man to get a catheter. We tried to encourage him to go back to the States where at least he could get better medical treatment. But he politely declined, and it was clear that Pedro was simply going to face his final days on his own terms and on his native soil. It was really good to see him, even though I knew it was likely going to be the last time. Last Wednesday, Pedro checked into a hospital complaining of stomach pains. He didn't check out. I'm told the end was quick and painless, and for that, I'm grateful. He leaves behind a wife, 6 children, 14 grandchildren, and countless others who are grateful for a lifetime of service, love, and self-sacrifice that won't ever be forgotten. Maraming salamat, Peds. Kumustahin mo ang tatay ko?